Hi, everyone. So welcome to our workshop slash presentation, Building the Capacity of Educators to Work with Undocumented Students and Students in Mixed Status Families. Thank you for joining us. So to start, we want to do a land acknowledgement. It is important that we acknowledge the land on which we reside and we present. As the Tongva and Kich land, we acknowledge the violent history of this land as a result of colonization and enslavement. Furthermore, we also would like to acknowledge the impact that this pandemic has had on many of us who are here today, including many losses for a lot of us and a lot of us within historically disinvested and excluded communities. And so we do want to recognize that before we start this presentation. And we want to take a moment to thank all of you who are showing up here today, and to also honor and thank our those of us who are visiting us or with us in spirit today. And so our agenda is as follows. We're going to do a brief introduction of ourselves, and we're also going to do an overview of undocumented students, also with a focus on California as well, or a brief overview. We will be doing an overview on the Allies of Dreamers Certificate Program, and we're actually going to engage in a plática to talk about our personal experiences. And lastly, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. And so I am Cristal Almonte. I'm a PhD candidate in Claremont Graduate University, focusing on education, specifically higher education and student affairs. I am non-undocumented, and I'm the proud daughter of 3 immigrant parents. I come from a mixed status family, and so my experiences have been shaped by living within a mixed status family and multi-generational household. My work is personal, and so that is why I have continued to do this work. And I'm very grateful for the communities that have raised me and supported me to be here today. And part of the work that I do is to really work in solidarity with my communities and support through research and through other ways, particularly through my practice as an educator. And so I'm also going to go ahead and let Dr. Montiel introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Itzel Montiel. I'm a faculty fellow at the Claremont Graduate University, and I'm also an alum. I graduated in 2017 with my PhD in education policy, evaluation, and reform. My dissertation research focused on examining the experience of undocumented college students at highly selective private colleges. When I entered Claremont Graduate University, I did so with 2 other undocumented students, and collectively we really worked together not only to advance Claremont's ability to engage and work with undocumented students, but also to create the program in which we'll be discussing later today.
To start, we wanted to go ahead and just clarify, undocumented individuals are folks who may not have a legal authorization to be in the United States, who may have crossed the border or overstayed their visa and fell out of status. And we also want to make sure that we mention, we will never use the term illegal. That term has been essentially weaponized and constructed to really dehumanize and criminalize undocumented immigrants. And that's just not a term that we will be using. Furthermore, no human being is illegal. And we have to consider the violent history of racist nativist rhetoric and the way that it has been used, that this rhetoric has been used to justify the exploitation and the abuse that immigrants of color and people of color in the United States face. And so we wanted to make sure we clarify this, and we do so before moving forward with the presentation. And so it is important for us to note that there's still no permanent path to citizenship. While there have been many attempts, none have been successful. And so what has happened during this time, specifically under the previous administration, were a lot of policy changes to deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, and temporary protected status, TPS. especially, or one of the biggest things being that DACA was actually rescinded in 2017. And through that, and in several court cases, it made its way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court did uphold DACA. However, it also outlined very clearly the way that DACA could be terminated, highlighting the fact that these are essentially liminal programs. And so this previous administration really made a lot of changes, and it impacted whether or not there could be new applicants. As of the Supreme Court hearing, they had opened up DACA for new applicants. However, after a federal court in Texas, DACA was essentially closed for new applicants and has currently not taken any new applicants. This has also meant that a lot of the folks who had applied during that time period, their applications have not been reviewed, and their money hasn't been refunded. So several people did apply. Once DACA became available, a lot of people mobilized to support new applicants, and it didn't result in folks becoming recipients, right, of DACA due to this federal court. And while there have been state and institutional policy wins, it's also important to really stress the fact that we do have a generation of undocumented youth who are essentially, coming up without the possibility of having access to DACA. And there's really a new wave of educators and undocumented youth who are needing access to more information, right? And this really highlights the importance of staying up to date. This highlights just the fact that things change very quickly, and this requires a lot of intentionality while staying up to date and disseminating the right information. And so in order for us to kind of give you all a context of where our work is, we wanted to give you the context in California because that's where we both are doing our work in Claremont Graduate University. And so approximately 1 in 30 students in California schools is undocumented. 1 in 8 students lives in mixed status households with at least one undocumented parent. And out of the DACA applicants, approximately 240,000 are actually from California. And in California specifically, we actually have in-state tuition for undocumented students and also state-sponsored financial aid. However, we do want to acknowledge the fact that this is California specific and not the case across the United States, which is important to note because where we are located, the context of where we are working matters and impacts the resources available to educators and practitioners to share with undocumented communities. And so while we are giving you a context of California, it is important that as we're engaging in this work of being supportive practitioners, that we are doing our due diligence of staying up to date on the information, and not only on the policy changes, but on the resources available, and really curating, right, what is available to students as they're pursuing education from P through higher education, right? And so I'm gonna go ahead and let Dr. Montiel take it from here.
Thanks, Crystal. So as I mentioned, as a student at Claremont with my other colleagues, one of the things that was really important to us is to understand that DACA was temporary. There was research that came out related to DACA that showed that because of the temporary nature, it didn't provide a path to citizenship, it wouldn't be enough to sustain long-term educational gains. And so my colleagues and I analyzed some data from community colleges and started really categorizing the different components of support systems that community college students really needed to then get to graduate, transfer, and eventually earn bachelor's degrees, as well as enter postgraduate degree programs as well. So we categorize these different things and build a framework of institutional and docu-competence. This is a capacity building framework that talks about the different elements within an institution that need to be in place for undocumented students to thrive. It goes anything from training of faculty and staff. What that has usually looked like is allied trainings, where it's a couple of hours, of professional development, where the latest data on undocumented youth is shared, and maybe one or two things that could be implemented within a classroom or within the educational institution. But we really wanted to think, what does it look like, not only to have those once every year, but to really implement a practice in which we shape different aspects of an institution to be more ready and able to serve undocumented students. So one of the things that we highlight is the need to be visible and open about our support for undocumented students as well, of shifting college outreach and recruitment to look at non-traditional students, and also to look at students who may not be your valedictorians. I think we've all heard on the news about the undocumented valedictorians, but really shifting that perspective into supporting students who are to a degree pushed to the margins of the educational pipeline as well. We also look at implementing comprehensive financial aid policy through institutional lens that can really open up access for individuals, as well as looking at what support systems or student groups that are on campus or can be supported to ensure that undocumented youth are able to organize and gather and really troubleshoot together as well. And then the other pieces are kind of new pieces of this institution on docu-competence framework, which is both looking at the health and psychological services that are available to students, knowing that being undocumented creates very specific needs that oftentimes go ignored by institutions or unaddressed. And so really calling those opportunities out and helping institutions to really guide through more than just an insular approach, but really to link the work of institutions to support undocumented students to larger policy advocacy movements that will really change and shape the long-term immigration policy, which would help undocumented students as well. Because of this, this framework is really social justice and practice-based framework. It's not just a theoretical framework. It's really, how do we refine and work in each of these aspects, and how do we maybe add to it or take away as the work evolves, not only within the context of an institution, but also nationwide as well. And it's really focused on requiring actions by institutions and institutional actors as well. This framework we first tested at CGU, of really thinking about how CGU was engaging with the undocumented students that were there, and how we were building opportunity to train other educators across the pipeline of PK to 20 who would be interacting with undocumented students or students of mixed status families as well. So while we were students, we collaborated with the now Dean of the School of Educational Studies, Professor Will Perez, who at the time was faculty at CGU and one of the preeminent scholars on undocumented youth and support systems for undocumented students, to write a grant for an initial pilot of creating this certificate program, which came to be the Allies of Dreamers certificate program. Next slide, please. So this program really wanted to engage educators, again, across the educational pipeline, to really not only think critically about what issues affect undocumented students, but then to engage them in starting to identify solutions testing solutions and workshopping the different solutions within the classroom, but also taking actions within whatever field or whatever level of education that they're currently serving in. So this is an outline of the 4 courses. The first course really gives a historical and contemporary perspective of undocumented youth and mixed status families. This is really where we start to learn about the policies that have shaped immigration before, start to learn how immigration before it became a federal issue was something that was really implemented by the states, and how that turned into the immigration or the Department of Homeland Security and its different arms that we have today as well. We also start to investigate the misconceptions around undocumented immigrants in the United States and about what is technically referred to as unauthorized immigration as well. This is where we start to examine the ways in which rhetoric informs policy and vice versa, how certain policy has uplifted and perpetuated some of this racist, nativist thinking that fuels a lot of hatred, but also a lot of disinvestment in undocumented communities as well. And we first introduced the term dreamer in this course as well. Again, as you see here, our certificate program is called Allies of Dreamers, but throughout this course, we really both unpack and complicate what both ally and dreamer means, and the ways in which these terms and sort of the actions surrounding these terms have helped to a certain degree, but also harmed in certain aspects as well, the community of undocumented students. And so how we can continue to evolve not only our use of these terms, but really push for more comprehensive language and equitable language that allows us to stand up for undocumented students as well. The main deliverable across this whole program is one, a resource portfolio where our students begin to learn how to look for trustworthy information around immigration policy changes or resources for undocumented youth and their families, can learn how to identify data that can support the debunking of misconceptions as well. And so this is something that they carry out throughout the course as well. And then the first class, they also work on examining 1 or 2 key issues impacting undocumented youth. And this is the selection of the issue is important because they'll build upon their work through the next courses. The second course examines current policy impacting undocumented students and their families. This is where we review updates on DACA, any state level institution policies or financial aid policies, and institutional supports as well, that are defining and can set a precedent for other institutions as well. We also begin to understand the role of institutions in creating opportunity. We go through several case studies of institutions that have really opened the door for undocumented youth in an equitable way, and begin to explore the pathways of undocumented students, whether it's going to higher ed and then postgraduate education, or really to understand the different opportunities in which undocumented youth can eventually become professionals and have a career that that they love, and that they can also thrive and create financial stability as well. As part of this course, students also engage in doing an institutional analysis of either an organization in which they're working in or would like to work in, to really understand and map, as you saw in the previous framework, what aspects of the institutional undocumented competence framework this organization is doing well in which aspects have more opportunity for growth as well. In the third course, which is the course that Crystal and I are currently teaching right now, we really unpack this idea of allyship and introduce a spectrum from allyship, which can signal support in a very limited way oftentimes, to really moving across the spectrum of eventually becoming a co-conspirator, right? And really thinking about what privileges and positions each of us hold within the institutions in which we work, and to what extent do we sometimes use those to the point of perhaps being uncomfortable or causing some discomfort, but pushing through that to be able to really partner with our undocumented communities as well. And then we also build and implement strategies across the educational pipeline. We go through different scenarios. We bring external partners as well to who are on the ground working with communities, so our students can also get exposure of what this work looks like over the long term as well, and through a multi-layered approach that connects to community as well. And as part of the class deliverable, they begin to design that solution and really begin to map out what that solution to the issue that they identified would be. Again, we want to take this into actionable steps. We know that someone who is just beginning to learn about the issues that undocumented students face may not be ready, to fully transform their curriculum or advocate within their school, but there are actions that all of us can take. And so this is where the spectrum of allyship comes into play, and really think about the actions that we can all make at an individual level, while also working toward policy and systems change as well. And in the last course, we really get to practice or build a community of practice and thinking about the wellness, both of our students as they begin to engage in working with undocumented communities. We always say that this is the work of a lifetime, because a lifetime of inequities have led us to this point. And so to undo them, it's going to take a lot of work as well. And so we want to make sure that this work is sustainable for the students who are entering the profession in the next couple of years, but also that they're able to support the wellness of their own undocumented youth as well as the families as well. So part of the deliverable for this class is creating a wellness plan, as well as showcasing the final products that they've been working on throughout the entire course. Next slide. And so far, we have completed 4 full cohorts, and we're about to finish one at the end of this spring term. 38 students have completed the full certificate program, with an additional 23 students who have come in and out at different courses as well. This is an 8-unit credit-bearing program, so a lot of students end up taking it as part of their electives toward their teacher certification, or as a standalone as well, or as part of a PhD program as well.
And it's also important to note that our students come not only from education, but from various disciplines, including policy, also within health. And so that's also pushed the ways that they've engaged in the solutions that they have created. And so, as we've mentioned, students are tasked with creating solutions, right? And having part of the deliverable for this course, for the series of courses, is working on a potential intervention solution. And that can look very different based on students. We have had students who created workshops, podcasts, lesson plans, have also created proposals to present with institutions themselves. And so here are a couple of the sample projects that students have done, aimed towards admissions practitioners on our right over here. And then also on our left, it was a newsletter created by a student, which was also with the hope of pushing towards creating a dream center on their campus, or an undocumented student resource center on a campus, particularly a high school campus within California. And so we see a couple of the other things here, which was a workshop on storytelling. And so this one's specifically geared towards K through 12 students. However, what we have also seen is that storytelling is a very powerful way to engage in theorizing and in healing. And so this can also be used, counter storytelling can also be used outside of the K through 12 grades, right? It can be within higher education and beyond. And we've also had students who've been very focused on the healthcare components and the issues that arise within undocumented communities because of healthcare access. And so that has led to workshops on what are the barriers and the implications, and also with the push to create resources or solutions to increase the access for healthcare. And so to that point, as we mentioned before, we wanted to engage in a plática. For us as women of color, a lot of the work that we have read and that we engage in is from a critical feminist lens, right? Feminists of color in particular. And one of the ways that that happens is through pláticas, right? Or through kitchen talk. And so when we think about that, that's really the ways that we have actually continued to expand this program, to engage in the learning and unlearning process for ourselves as we continue shifting the way that the courses are, are run, the way that we're going to engage with our students, and how we become co-creators in that space with our students. And so one of the beautiful ways that we have been able to do that is by shifting the work that we are centering, right? The work that we are reading. And so one of the wonderful things that happened is during this time of the program, the Undocumented Americans was published. And so that book really pushed us to center the experiences of undocumented individuals who often are essentially like pushed towards the margins of these conversations and narratives, right? And pushed us to really think about the ways that this notion of illegality is socially, culturally, politically constructed and has been weaponized to essentially exploit and justify the abuse of undocumented immigrants. And furthermore, we were also able to start engaging in conversations on mattering and thriving within school context because of Bettina Love's book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, with the emphasis on abolitionist teaching, right? And pushing us to think about this work that we're doing as a praxis, and really viewing this work as the beginning of showing, how do we engage in this as a praxis with our students, with the hope that they're going to continue doing this, and really centering the fact that this is an ongoing process that will continue to shift. And inevitably, what happens is we will face discomfort, but really being able to grow through that discomfort and sit with that discomfort. And so this work has allowed us to start working on building a network of practitioners, or as I've talked to Dr. Montiel about, is it really networking or is it community building, right? And so we are pushing towards community building within our classrooms and beyond, right? Because we serve to support each other in this process. And we acknowledge that the space is very much a subversive space within not only our institution that we're currently in, but within many institutions, the ways that we are engaging. And so our class is a space of resistance.
As we wrap up, I know that there is also a resource link that we'd like to share with folks. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we do have a resource that was created by one of our students during their time in the program, which is for educators for Undocu students resource guide. I'm sorry, there is a typo, but you know what, that is life. Sometimes this happens, but it is linked. And so this will be shared with you on, I believe the slides will as well. And we also wanted to share a link to a video on the Allies of Dreamers certificate program. What, this conversation, this plática that we just had, it was just to really show the ways that we engage in these pláticas, and through these pláticas, really affirm each other, and engage in like critical conversations, oftentimes uncomfortable conversations, and engage in unlearning from each other, while also engaging in a lot of reflexivity and questioning, our own positions, questioning our own assumptions and biases that we bring. And this all comes from a very, I would say, like grounded in humility, because this is from our experience and our perspective doing this work. And we also acknowledge that where we are in these spaces, this is very much a privileged space in many ways, right? Being in these academic spaces, having these conversations. But nevertheless, this is the work that we are doing, and we do take it very seriously. And this is a praxis for us, and I wouldn't say not only a teaching praxis, but just a praxis for life in general and how we choose to move in the world. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. We will be open for questions and answers at the end.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, everybody.